Welcome, everybody. It's 10:30. If you do a roll call for me, please, Ethan.
Jeff Swearingen. Here. Patrick Updike.
Here.
Jeff Sunholm.
Here.
Marty Smith.
Here.
Tom Lampy.
Here.
John Benson. Bob Van Wolfrat.
Ryan Dreiling representing Bob Van Wolfrat.
Denise Pavlik. Andy Buffington.
Here.
Ellen Hagan.
Here.
Deb Crable. Dave Ness.
Here.
Jason Leonard.
Here.
Rob Rotter.
Here.
Mike Casper.
Here.
Carol Lund Smith. Larry Smith.
Here on the telephone.
Linda Frederickson. Kelly Grosskirth. And 12.
Thank you. Somebody else just beeped in. I'm going to do introduction of board members. Let's start with the board members that are on the phone, please, starting with Larry.
Larry Smith, Hickey County Emergency Management on the telephone.
Denise Pavlik, Scott Emergency Communications Center on the telephone.
Carol Lund Smith, Iowa Law Enforcement Academy on the phone.
Okay, starting with Ellen.
Ellen Hagan, Joe Fire and Rescue, past president of the Iowa Firefighters Association, representing volunteer firefighters.
David Ness, Municipal Police from Des Moines.
Andy Buffington with Winnebago and Hancock County Emergency Management and Communications, representing communication centers.
Jason Leonard, Waverly Police Department, representing Municipal Police.
Tom Lampy, DPS.
Chris Myers, I'm the SWIC.
Patrick Updike, Department of Corrections. Let me do that again.
Sure.
Patrick Updike, Iowa Department of Corrections.
Marty Smith, Iowa Department of Public Health.
Jeff Sunholm, Iowa Department of Transportation.
Rob Rotter, Iowa County Sheriff, representing sheriffs.
Mike Casper, Lynn County Sheriff's Office, representing sheriff's offices.
Mike, you can slide up there if you need to.
I'm okay.
I know you want to be on camera, so.
I'm at the Thanksgiving kids table.
Okay. So welcome, everybody. We'll try to get through this agenda as quickly as we can. Oh, Jeff, I'm sorry. Didn't see you. Jeff, you can certainly join us. Sure.
I'm good right here.
Lucky guy. Lucky guy. All right, I'm looking for a motion of the approval of today's agenda, if I can get that, please. Ellen, do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Jeff. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's approved. Approval of the meeting minutes from October 12th, 2017. Get a motion for that, please.
Andy Buffington, so moved.
Andy Buffington, a second.
Second by Casper.
Second, Mike Casper. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. SWIC report.
All right, thank you, Chair Lampy. Well, I'll start off by saying I just returned last night from a joint National Council of SWICs and SAFECOM meeting in Norman, Oklahoma. There were some very, very solid presentations on the emergency response associated with Hurricane Harvey. Those are just coming out now. They're just starting to kind of get their bearings about them, and eventually they're going to produce an after-action report, from what I understand. And once that is available, I plan on sharing that with people here. I feel like there's a lot we can learn from how they handled Harvey, given the extent and scale and scope of the disaster and the number of people it affected. It may not directly apply to a lot of the things we do here in Iowa, but again, I think a lot of the lessons they've learned and practices that they'll be incorporating in the future will scale down nicely to Iowa. Obviously, we're not going to get a Category 4 hurricane here, but we do get things like tornadoes, derechos, ice storms, overall generally severe thunderstorm wind events, blizzards. So we can certainly apply some of their lessons learned to what we see here in Iowa. A lot of things came up in addition to that, including some of the skip items. Again, thank you to every board member and every committee member and every audience attendee that participated in the enhanced skip process here in Iowa. We were able to exchange some feedback on that enhanced skip process, and so far it's been primarily positive. They did talk about a concept regarding the emergency communications ecosystem. This is a relatively new concept, and as this kind of matures a little bit, I think this could be a discussion point for the future as well. But again, we'll wait to have those discussions until a little bit further down the road. One other announcement is that the SafeCom survey is available for emergency communications personnel to fill out. I would encourage everybody to do so that OEC can get a good idea of the current emergency communications landscape here in Iowa. My hope is that we would be very well represented within that survey so our voices can be heard. A lot of traveling this month. I was at TIA and TR8 in October, and I would count that as a success as well. In addition to normal activities associated with standards and debating on policies or documents, I was able to speak with some members of TR8.3, which is the encryption committee, and I've been able to secure some of the representatives from TR8.3 to attend our next encryption meeting. And they'll give their insights on the standards, where they sit now, where they're going, and then given that we do have some manufacturers on board, the likelihood of those standards being incorporated into end products. So that should be excellent as well. My outreach to local counties and stakeholders continues. I don't have the numbers with me this morning. Those are sitting in my office, and I don't have them memorized. But I'll be visiting more counties in the next several weeks, including Humboldt County on Monday. So plenty of windshield time. On to encryption. We did have our third meeting regarding the encrypted interoperable talk group option on Isicsb. This one basically continued in our evaluations of the device landscape and what would possibly work on a network the size of Isicsb when you start getting down to things like single key versus multi-key radios. How do we handle key distribution? How do we handle key updates? How do we distribute those keys? Who handles those keys? So there's a lot of things that we're talking about now, and a lot of good ideas came from the meeting, but unfortunately, some of our ideas aren't currently reflected in products or standards. So hopefully that will dovetail nicely into our next meeting when those representatives from TR8.3 are on the phone, so we can maybe give them some insights on what we think could be a standard for the future, what would be perhaps a product that would work for a network the size of Iowa as far as spatial coverage and diversity of users, and maybe we'll have a chance to spearhead some product development going forward and get our ideas reflected into the end user products. If you're curious who those representatives are going to be, Andy Davis, who is TIA TR8 chair, will give a presentation on those standards to start off the meeting. He's also employed with Motorola. He'll have his TIA and TR8 hat and Motorola hat on that day, so he'll have two roles. Josh Johnson from EF Johnson will be present, and then also Derek Wells from Harris will be participating. On a side note, I think that the vendors will benefit from that meeting as well. They'll have a chance to see what we're thinking, and I know some other states are curious to see what we're going to do as well. I was approached with some questions from Missouri and Minnesota and Nebraska about how we're going to handle potential encrypted interoperable talk groups on our network. So I think a lot of people are watching and very interested in what we're doing because more and more states are moving towards this. They're not quite sure how to approach it yet. So given that, our timeline for this, it really hasn't changed a whole lot. Perhaps something over the next 14 to 24 months once we factor in all of the process with devices, governance, and then testing. I think around that time we'll be ready to go with that. The RIC projects are now underway. I've been very pleased with those as well. RICs 3, 4, 5, and 6 have met on interstate interoperability. The discussions were very effective, and I know I've got some meeting attendees in audience right now, so thank you for your feedback. We outlined the current landscape of communications resources, what's available now, what's going to be perhaps changing over the next few years, and started putting the question out there how we can adapt. Again, our neighboring states are also very interested in what we're doing with that. I was approached by the SWICs from Wisconsin, Nebraska, Kansas, and South Dakota about what we plan on doing, and also Minnesota. if I didn't mention Minnesota yet. But so they're all very curious to see where we're headed with this stuff. RIC 2's meeting will be in another week or so, and then RIC 1 will be meeting during the regularly scheduled call to talk about prisoner transport scenarios. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we have adequate sheriff's office representation on there. Sheriff Roder and Lieutenant Casper are expected to be on the call, and I know we've had a few other accepted invitation invites recently from sheriff's office representatives. Hopefully the idea that you've all kind of picked up on is that I love engaging stakeholders when we're developing policy and procedure. I think that's probably going to be one of the best purposes for the RICs going forward, especially we can get that organic policy development from end users that's going to work well for the end user base, and I think that'll work well for everybody. Training Chair Denise Pavlik and Vice Chair Walzer have been very active in seeking out training opportunities. They've been very agreeable since I've delegated a lot of those aspects to them, and I appreciate their time and effort, so thank you, Wally. One thing that I do plan on using is we are allocated a certain amount of TA resources every year from OEC. I plan on using them all. So hopefully we can increase the amount of training opportunities provided by OEC here in Iowa, and then combined with some other exercises that happen every year, like the COMEXs, I think we could be very, very well prepared when the situation calls someday. I also want to state that I've been here for 6 months now. It's been a very wild ride as far as getting up to speed, and it's kept me on my toes. I've enjoyed learning a lot of new things and meeting a lot of new people, and I want to thank everybody for their patience with me as I've come through this learning curve. I know that everyone has been working diligently to advance interoperability in Iowa, and I hope that I can help continue to facilitate those efforts. I want to say that I'm very motivated by what we have done, but even more so what we have the potential to accomplish over the next year. Captain Walzer pointed out at our RIC 6 Interstate Interoperability meeting that we are presented with the opportunity to do something very profound, and I'll go so far to say transcendental, that will leave a very positive, lasting impression for decades in Iowa. So again, thank you to everybody for your efforts. With that being said, that concludes my report, and I'll take any questions.
Questions for Chris? Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, we'll move on to the 911 Council report. Blake?
To report today. Sean, if you want to do the text 911 map. I know John briefed this last month. We had a governor's press conference about it as well. It's colored in a little bit more. There's 5 counties remaining. 4 of those are basically the same technological hurdle that we're attempting to overcome. So one solution, 4 more get colored in. We're even closer to statewide text 911. A couple other things. I believe he socialized our draft legislation for the upcoming session as it relates to 911. If there's any questions on that, if any agency group wants a presentation, we'd be happy to do that. Also, last month was the ICN presentation as far as the network merging of the wire line onto the next generation network. That is up on YouTube. Today's presentation was on the shared services, kind of sharing the call handling equipment. That presentation will also be up on YouTube probably early next week. If there's anyone interested in rewatching that or getting that out to your constituents, that'd be great if you could. If you have any questions, you know where to get a hold of me at.
Blake,
Yes.
I can see the map that it's available. How many counties are actually publicizing Text Us?
So we did the statewide press conference. We showed the map. We've provided 2 different versions of flyers. We also ran PSAs back in the end of June, beginning of July. And at that point, we've kind of let the counties do what they want to do as far as outreach to local newspapers, local radio stations. So I don't have a real good count of how many are actively advertising it at the moment.
My county's going.
That being said, there's been documented cases already in Iowa where there's somebody has texted 911, and because of it, it's been a successful outcome. So we see the benefits. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Blake. Moving right along to the UGC Chair Buffington.
Cool, thank you. Met on October 19th via conference call. Attendance was a little bit lower than normal. We always go through our RIC reports. RIC's regions 3, 4, and 6 did not have a report. Region 1, like Swickmeyer's talked about, they're going to be working on statewide transportation groups, talk groups, and IDOC has requested a seat at that table. RICs 2 and 5 are going to be working on the state-to-state communication and how we're going to do that. And again, I believe it's just RIC 2 is the last one to have that meeting here very soon. And then RIC 2 is also working on a call logger, and one of the things that was brought up during the regional talks is a concern of how we're moving information utilizing the RICs. Does it need to be a top-down approach, meaning from the board to the UGC to the RIC committee, to the RIC chairs, to the RIC committee, or does it need to be a bottom-up? And what we've talked about time and time again is that it needs to go both ways. It needs to be a top-down and a bottom-up. If there's concerns at the local level, that needs to get to the board or at least the UGC or somewhere, that it can go through those regional interoperable committees. That's how they're best utilized at this time. So we talked briefly about FirstNet. That there was an AT&T representative that discussed pricing, and that the intent is going to be to either match or be below those local carrier prices, which is going to be good as FirstNet rolls out across the state of Iowa. We have later in business, we have 4 applications that we've reviewed and to approve those. And also, one of the things we talked about is there's going to be a little bit of an addition to our current application process in the fact that the applications once received would go straight to the UGC, get put on our agenda, and then socialized, and then here to the board. What we're going to do now is that we've re-energized and revitalized the applicant review panel, which there's a member from the east, central, and west part of the state of Iowa, as well as the SWIC is a member of that. And then the RIC chair of wherever the applicant is from is going to be part of that process. And it's going to be very organic in the fact that they're going to be, those 5 individuals will be just communicating together, decide if they need to have a conference call or something like that with the applicant to make sure that what the applicant's intent is clear, so that as those applications roll in, as questions come up, which they do quite often, that somebody with a little bit more technical expertise is going to be able to answer those questions for the UGC members. And we talked about what our role was, the UGC, because sometimes there seems to be a lot of cross-pollination in amongst our committees. And so as the user group, as we discussed, we wanted to make sure that we're not stepping on toes or going someplace that we shouldn't be. We didn't really talk about how we're going to overcome that, but I think as we move along, we'll keep that on our agenda and see if we have any ideas, just to make sure that those tasks that we need to do are getting done, and that we're not duplicating efforts here at the board level or any of the committee levels. So that ends my report. If there's any questions.
Great, thank you, sir. Moving on to finance. Rick Rothsworth isn't here. I believe Ellen will give the quick report for us.
Appropriation funds available, $255,674.01. The SLIC-P, we have a total of $25,979.95. The 20% matching ICN's $5,195.99, and the 80% federal is $20,783.95. Any other numbers that you would like, Chairman?
No, I think that suffices. I think there may be a little bit more than 25,000 left in SLIG-P. We'll have to maybe take a look at that.
Total amount down at the bottom. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll get with Chair Grosker.
Okay.
And DPS finance people. And I will send that information out by email. Okay? All right. All right, let's move on to governance. I believe David Ness will be doing that today.
Thanks, Chairman.
November 6th, we had a discussion and we began to review a handful of policies that were forwarded to us by the Standards Committee. We provided some feedback to the Standards Committee, and we hope that through some continued efforts with both groups, we'll be able to bring those back to the full board, perhaps as soon as next month. Thank you.
Did Deb join the call on operations?
She sent me an email that she will not be able to be on the call today.
Okay. We'll move on to.
Have an update if you want it.
Sure, go ahead.
There you go.
All right. Chief Crable wanted to pass on that we did not have a meeting. The survey to the PSAPs is being sent out to identify which PSAPs have no capability to connect with the interoperability system. And then we're also looking to see how those that can connect to it will do so. We have a regular meeting next week that we'll talk about a work assignment that the SWIC's assigning to the Operations Committee. That's all she gave me to report.
Right. Appreciate you filling in. Hey, outreach, we're right back to Ellen.
We continue to send out information to all the people that we have contact with.
Got the newsletter?
Newsletter, any updates that we get. I've been sending the broadband stuff and ICN stuff, so anything that I get goes out.
I've been noticing my inbox fills up every time you send a.
I try and
I
get
get
you
slammed
out of there
pretty
so
hard.
you don't get it over and over.
Also, Ethan should be recognized. He does an excellent job at keeping the website up to date on recent news and on the bottom half of the website. We're in regards to First Ed or Isix, our Facebook page is up to date, Twitter's up. You're doing a great job on that. Appreciate it. If the website isn't up to speed, as we all know, people lose confidence in the as far as where we're at. So you're doing a great job. I think Sean's going to share some more information here on just that, on where we're headed with mapping and the new system. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot here, but I hope you're going to talk about the new application process that you're.
Back to the website for a second. I have no complaints. I can find stuff. They send me and say, how does this look? Looks good. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. All right.
All right. Well, I'm thankful that you said that because we sure try hard. And what Chief Lampy said is right on. Ethan's been cranking it out, and he's been posting a lot of stuff to keep making sure that everybody is posted. And per some recommendations, we did create a custom LOI and MOA page. And we're also going to record a YouTube video of how people are applying. So we're taking it to the best level we can to make sure that everybody knows how to join. The new join screen, we've been actively testing. We found a couple of bugs where we were working on those the last 2 days. I'm very hopeful that it'll be done and ready and moved out next week. We also have a map that shows the pins of every person that has joined or that's in progress of joining. So now you'll be able to go out to our map and see little pins of people who have joined or are in the process of joining the Isicsb platform. Those updates will be moved out at the same time. So it was just, we got some really good feedback at the Motorola Trunk User Group up in Dallas County. We went through and we walked through that step by step. And people said it could be easier. So I took all those notes back and we made those additional pages, and we sure hope we made it easier. We listen, we try and we do our best. We can't accommodate every request, but we sure try. Our newsletters have been going out. They've been getting good response. PSA development is ongoing. We're hoping to get something coordinated here shortly and have that started. The PSAs wouldn't be played until first quarter of next year. Social media, we have created and implemented a LinkedIn company page for the board. We will begin working to get the social media icon and the links on the website. It was just a matter of making sure that we were happy with how the social media page was up, and getting a couple pictures up, getting that started, but that has been implemented. The big FirstNet Isicsb kickoff meeting November 30th. I'm hopeful that everybody has seen the invites. We sent the invites out twice already to our mailing group is nearly 4,000 people. So if you did not get it, it's not because I'm not trying. So please grab me and I'll make sure that you are on our list or that I can try and get to you somehow. We're also putting those on our Facebook page. There's links through our Twitter page. I put a link on everything. So if you can't find it, please tell me. I'll add another link somewhere. But that is going to be, I have a tentative agenda. Now, again, the word is tentative. So I want to make sure that no one gets too caught up in this. What we're looking at is it'll start off with an introduction, and then what we'll do is talk about the Isicsb platform. We'll be doing coverage maps, mobile coverage benefits, and some technology transition path information, like what technology you have, how will you connect that to the Isicsb platform. That will be discussed. And then we'll do a little technical Q&A. And then we're going to have a control station demo. Now, this will be handled by Rhonda. She's been graciously helping us get the context, start setting it up. She's going to do a little monologue and talk about why this is so important, because I didn't understand what you guys had come through and what the past looked like. So I felt that was important, that everybody gets that. What was the past look like, and why is this interoperable system so important, especially for PSAPs? So she's going to talk a bit about that, and then we're going to do a demo. We're going to go out and ping all the sites that are online with our system, which is about 5 sites, I want to say. And then I will do another demo of how to join. So you better believe that site better be out there ready and have already been tested so many times that if there's any problems, I'll be probably kicked outside by Mr. Lampy. Then we'll do lunch on your own, then we'll come back, and FirstNet AT&T will be going through pricing, benefits, coverage, how to join, some of the maps, and they're going to bring some devices so we can see some of the hardened devices, what the real differences are. And we'll take a break then, and then it will go further through devices. And so that's why this meeting is really big. And just so everyone's clear, we're hoping to do 5 more of these beginning next year. We've already kind of looked at the sites. I've kind of shared a little bit about the cities that were identified. We did have some questions about, can you come to other locations? And the reason why we can is because with the rollout of FirstNet with AT&T, we're trying to make sure that it's turned on. We don't really want to go out into the middle of Iowa to a location where it's not turned on yet, because that wouldn't be a beneficial demo for anyone. So we worked with AT&T to identify sites in each region that would allow for us to hold a successful demo when we do this. And at the same time, when we have those, it'll be a similar meeting, similar agenda to what will be happening November 30th. So if you can't make it November 30th, don't be heartbroken, because we're going to do 5 more of these, and probably in a region near you. So I just want to stress that. Beyond that, we are finalizing the telecommunicator video. We are implementing new first responder follows with our social media. We're still more than willing to help or assist any board members that want to take new pictures for the website. And beyond that, that's pretty much it.
If you haven't got your picture that you want for the website, please contact Sean or Ethan so we get an updated one posted on there.
Yep.
either a new one that they can take for you, or you one for from your department that you would like to have on the website as soon as possible, so we can get it cleaned up. Be great.
Any questions? All right.
Moving on to training, Chair Pavlik, are you on the phone?
I am.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay, so we did not meet in the month of October, actually due to a funeral, so I apologize for that. We will be meeting next month, however. Next week, November 13th through the 16th, we are holding the Incident Tactical Dispatcher class at the Orrin Pape Center. We have capacity of 20. We actually have 14 enrolled, which I think is really awesome. We would have had more, but due to some issues with signing up with the prerequisites, we didn't have as many, but I would guess that if we did the class again, we would probably fill it up. We are also looking at January 22nd through the 25th, doing a series of Audio Gateway Train the Trainer classes. We're going to start in Council Bluffs, and the first day on the 22nd is kind of going to be a refresh class of the course, teaching tips, things of that nature. And then on the 23rd in Council Bluffs at the Potawatomi County EOC will be the actual class. They're going to move then on the 24th, and they're going to go to Des Moines, and they're going to hold another class there, and then they will move to the other side of the state on the 25th, and then they will hold a class there. That class is actually in Davenport at SECC, the Scott County EOC. So we're really excited about that. We're also looking at having our next state-sponsored COMT class possibly in February. We're looking at doing another COM-L, but doing it as a Train the Trainer course. We are also, as a group, I sent out to everybody the communications best practice guide. We're looking at another model, and we're trying to make that something that would fit for Iowa. So our group has been looking at that, and we will be discussing that next week when we have our conference call. And I think that's really all I have.
Denise, could you give the dates again on the class in December? Is that what you want? Or January?
November.
Or November?
November, it's 13th through the 16th, and that's the Incident Tactical Dispatch class. It's actually next week.
The one after that.
The audio Gateway class is January 22nd through the 25th. And it'll start in Council Bluffs on the 22nd and then the 23rd. The 24th will be the same class, just in a different location in Des Moines. And then on the 25th, it'll be the same class, but in Davenport for the eastern portion of the state.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on.
Questions?
Any other questions for Denise?
Denise, this is Chris. If I may make a request, after that tactical dispatching class, if we have a lot of people who are known to have wanted to take the class, but maybe their prerequisites were not in order, it may be a good idea to see if there's enough interest out there to perhaps have another one in a different location in the state. I would like to make sure that opportunities like this are available for as many people as possible. So perhaps that may be something we have to consider doing.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thanks, Denise. We'll move on to technology. Chair Updike.
Okay. Technology met on October 26th and November 7th. Spent a lot of time discussing the draft programming guide, whether to make it a public document or a confidential document. The overall attitude within the technology committee was to go ahead and make this a confidential document once it's adopted. The next step was that I contacted the AG's office to get their take on what are the steps that need to be taken to make such a document confidential, and so I know we've all seen this document, and so I asked Jeff Peters-Ellick to come to this meeting today so he could assist in clarifying some of the legal aspects of moving forward with making such a document confidential. So if it's okay, I'd like to ask Jeff to come up and
Certainly.
speak and field some questions.
You didn't tell me I was going to have to talk, Pat.
Tricked you.
We did speak the other day, and the subscriber programming guide, I think if the board determines that they want to do so, can be made a confidential document under Iowa's open records laws, policy decision for the board as much as it is a legal decision. A number of policy considerations that would warrant protecting those materials from disclosure, which should be given serious consideration by the board. In order to facilitate that, the board is going to have to adopt a policy that specifically references that document and the materials in those documents as far as being confidential, so it can fit under the code section that we're dealing with, the exception to the open records law, which would be Iowa Code Section 22.7, subparagraph 50. The board itself doesn't have independent rulemaking authority. It's under it's still something after all these years, I'm not sure what it means, under the joint purview of the Department of Public Safety and the Department of Transportation. Neither of those agencies that I've been able to determine have adopted rules that address this. That's something that we may want to talk to both of those agencies about adopting, so that we have both the policy of the board and the rules of the agencies under which the board operates. However, I think it's only necessary that there be a policy adopted, and you folks the board can adopt a policy. And the one thing I would make sure that you consider and do if you're going to adopt a policy is to make sure that you have a good handle on all of the things that might go into that. We've been talking specifically about the subscriber programming guide, but there could be other materials, whether it's some sort of encryption data, whether it's some sort of keying materials or things like that, that you may also, as you go forward with this process, you may want to make sure that we do everything all at once with one policy to the extent possible, so that we're not here every month trying to adopt a new and amended and substituted policy. That's my 30,000-foot view. As I pointed out to Pat when he sent me this thing, it might as well be written in hieroglyphics as far as I'm concerned. But it's not yet simplified enough that even a lawyer can understand it. But maybe you'll get to that point at some point in time.
Well, one of the things that we thought of additionally with all of this was to attach a non-disclosure agreement to it, just to solidify it, I guess, a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that the non-disclosure agreements, first of all, the first step I think is for the board to make the determination whether they want to make this a confidential document, or these types of materials confidential versus an open record. And then after that, yeah, I think an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, is a good idea. But then you're going to have to also decide how you're going to who's going to be required to sign NDAs, what information you're going to provide for people who may want to monitor the system as opposed to having access to the system for transmission purposes. I think you'd still want potentially a non-disclosure agreement. Is there going to be encryption for all of this, which kind of moots at least the third-party non-user need for a NDA? Those are all things I think the board's going to have to consider, and we can discuss. But I know that a lot of entities, I think, use the non-disclosure agreements. I think the entity up in Sioux City does. I don't know if Westcom does or not. I can't remember. Westcom does. So that would be consistent with how units have done, or entities have done that in the past. And I think that we can certainly work with you on preparing a non-disclosure agreement. And there's a lot of things that we'll have to probably discuss in your subcommittee. We can discuss as far as monitoring access with media and things like that. Those are all things that we haven't discussed and come to a conclusion, but all are things that we're going to have to address as we go forward. And I know those are the areas that Pat and I discussed. If there's any questions, Pat, if you have any other questions, we're happy to address those. But I think that was generally why you wanted me to show up. And it looks like I
Right.
showed up just in time.
Yeah, perfect timing.
Does anybody have any questions?
No, I think you have to write a policy, it sounds like.
Kind of headed that way.
And as I said, the important thing I think is, we specifically talked about these subscriber programming guides, but I'm going to guess there's going to be other information, other materials that you're probably going to want to include in that specific policy. And I can certainly work with Pat or whoever gets charged with that activity to come up with a policy. And then I can talk with DPS as well to see if they want to enact a rule. And I don't really have much influence over the DOT, but I can certainly work with my counterparts at the DOT to see if they want to do the same. And then we have, I think, all of the bases covered, and we don't need to, but I think it's not a bad idea. And I'm always fond of saying other than looking a little funny, there's nothing wrong with wearing a belt and suspenders both, and we might as well do that if we can.
I would ask that you work with governance, and John Benson's, that would be the vehicle to present to the board for a policy approval through governance.
Do we need to work more with DOT and DPS in these conversations,
In
possibly?
regards to the rule, yes, I would say so.
You have to if there's going to be a rule. You don't
Right.
necessarily have to if there's a policy, but the one thing it's important, since you are operating under the joint purview of those two agencies, to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And it doesn't necessarily have to be by a rule. A rule's a formal way of doing that, but at the very least, we need to make sure that everyone's on the same page moving forward.
Quick question. DOT has Chapter 4, 761.4, which is Public Records and Fair Information Practices. Have you reviewed that?
Most agencies have probably that identical
Okay.
section within their administrative rules. And I think that within that section, whether it's DPS or DOT, that would be probably the area that the rule might be adopted. I know for the Department of Public Safety, there's specific rules in other sections that make specific materials confidential as well, under that specific code section. Department of Corrections is a perfect example because they're the ones that really have a lot of the procedures in place with respect to the prison system that they have adopted specific rules for in that regard.
You could work with our in-house Barb Edmondson attorney on that too. She could help quite a bit.
Yeah, if you can get me their contact info. I just want, one other thing, this isn't an attempt to hide everything from everybody because, just as an example on this redacted version, just because it's a draft, it lists our SOA channels on there. I mean, there's going to be information that's public knowledge anyways. If you're smart enough to go to the FCC webpage, you can find this stuff, but there's just certain aspects of this document that's going to have information into it that we don't, if it does get out through some, genius hack or whatever, I suppose that can happen, but why make it get there even quicker? So it's, it's not to keep.
And you have to keep in mind the ultimate goal is to protect the system from people improperly accessing it and interfering with it. The access is one thing, but if you have someone that's actually interfering with emergency communications, that's a very significant problem that can be addressed, at least to some extent, by making some or all of these materials protected from disclosure.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Moving along. We did get some documentation from Ethan from the standards group with regards to talk group ID allocation. Ethan was looking for some technical input on some of the wording within this document. We talked about it over 2 phone calls, waiting for input from some of the technology members, and we ultimately came to the conclusion that it probably should be gone through again and reworded because some of the wording wasn't in line with the Isicsb system. And so it's kind of hard to make technical decisions on System A when you're actually dealing with System B. So they're going to hopefully revisit that, and then we can come back and provide more detail or input on that. There's been some other discussion about who's going to do the subscriber testing for the Isicsb system once it goes online. And one of the suggestions I made was that we take the Motorola's system capabilities document and use that as a form of testing subscriber units because that ultimately dictates whether that subscriber unit actually works on the system. So why not use those capabilities to test the subscriber units? And so through all of that discussion, the question was, well, what are we going to do for, what's going to be the minimum requirements for that subscriber unit to get on the system? So we kind of came to the conclusion that because there's so many different brands out there that maybe the minimum requirement would be push to talk, let up to listen, and not try to box ourselves in and then have somebody come back later and say, well, you said it was going to do this and maybe it can't or won't or what have you. So we're looking at taking that documentation and writing some wording to it that will kind of get the ball rolling on testing subscriber units, getting that moving forward. So more to come on that. An update on the SOA channels. We did get license granted October 24th for the 3 700 meg SOA channels. You can find that online. I believe the call sign's WRAE 443. We're licensed for 100,000 units, so I think we got it covered. And I need to do some follow-up with the coordination people on our 800 meg SOA channels because those haven't come through yet. Finally, we're also looking into 16 air-to-ground channels to add to the overall fleet map or programming of radios subscriber units. Everybody got that document. It's just ripped right from the NIFOG handbook, so it's not like it's secret. But if you go to page 49 and 50 of the NIFOG handbook, it lists those 16 channels. It tells you what the NAC codes are. It even throws in some FCC rules. One of the things that we ran into was, do we need to license these? One, we look one place, it says yes, the other place says no. So we're researching that to get a definitive answer, because if we had to license 16 channels at whatever we paid for the last, it might get a little bit pricey. But it's looking more like these don't need to be licensed. The only thing is now we got to come up with a state plan for use of them. And one of the things that we discussed within the technology was, okay, yeah, we can come up with a plan, but can we regionalize them? I guess if we make the state plan, we can do whatever we want to some degree as far as building that plan. But some of the input from the members was that we should get some of those people who actually fly those aircraft to get involved and provide some input. So I know Wally's got some connections there, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to dump this off on operations because it tends to be an operational thing. So I need to get with Deb on that. That's why I sent her my meeting minutes, was to give her a heads up that this is coming. And so I want to go back to the SOA channels and then I'll be done. I did talk to Ethan and emailed Sean. We did update the ICS 217A form with the new SOA channels. It's got the NAC codes, effective radiated power requirements, eligible users, wording, and a new version. I also asked them to keep the old versions and archive them in the back of the web page. So any version that we come out with will basically just have the date on it. It'll be version 2017-1101. That way you can look at it and see, oh, well, that's when they did it. So that's it for this month. Thanks.
A lot to do, Pat. Chris.
Patrick, I have a question for you. As far as approved device lists, there are some states out there now with TDMA networks that are operating in a similar spectrum as to what we're going to be. Would you be okay with me pinging my neighboring, or I shouldn't say neighboring SWICs that have a TDMA network to see if they have a list that we could perhaps borrow from right away that might lighten the workload on your group for some time?
Sure.
Okay.
So if I understand this right, you have a list of approved, but then when an entity applies and has one of those specific radios, you still physically test it to ensure it completely works. Even though it's approved, you still operate it on Isicsb to make sure that it's not causing an issue.
Here's where we're headed with this, hopefully. We will take that documentation and set up whatever those rules might be to operate. Those rules would go out to your vendors, your technicians. They would have to do it, because if we got straddled with testing everybody's subscriber units, I'd have to take another job just doing that.
But I understand that. That's not my point. My point is that the process to have it tested, even though it's on the list, to still physically have it tested, not you doing the testing, to someone having the ability to test it. And so we can sign off with Randy's crew that it in fact does work properly.
Yes.
Even though it is a listed radio.
That's the intent.
Okay. Any more questions for Chair Updike? All right, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to other reports. City board members have anything to share amongst ourselves? Marty?
Yeah, we're in IDPH, Department of Public Health is in the process of planning an exercise, and if there's any state agencies that has any state response teams you want to participate, let me know. We have a meeting this afternoon, kind of a concept type meeting to figure that out. So if anybody has something, let me know.
Okay. I do have one thing in regards to FirstNet and AT&T device. I was contacted by Molly from AT&T, and forgive me, I don't remember her last name. But AT&T has negotiated a national contract. It's called I think it's NASPO. Every state has a NASPO contract, and Iowa is one of them. So what they're doing is they're adding an amendment to allow for users to get the state pricing for the FirstNet devices and the AT&T plans. So that amendment will be attached through, DAS will do it, but the amendment was sent yesterday to Department of Administrative Services, and that amendment will allow users to purchase devices at state pricing and also the state pricing for the plans on through AT&T on the FirstNet network. So.
Do you know if state agencies or the state has a contract with another provider, is DPS working through the hoops to be able to use FirstNet versus the state cellular provider?
Well, I can tell you that right now we're with, I think we're totally Verizon for all our devices, phones, and our in-car computers for our data. But I'm going to be cautious until we're satisfied that the FirstNet AT&T network has got the same coverage or better, because there's a lot of things. It's all about the coverage, right? I'm not going to completely switch over all of our devices until the coverage is adequate. For that reason. So eventually, absolutely, we want to be on the FirstNet network. It gives you the priority. When the disasters happen, our stuff keeps working and everybody else is clogged because of the user base, right? So that's a real simple concept on what FirstNet provides, but it provides a lot of other things. But until the coverage is adequate, not at this time, because it's not even built yet, right? So we're looking at 3 to 5 years And at that time, I'm sure they'll take a look at it.
That's no different than any other agency that's out there though, too.
Right. Yep.
We're in the same boat. I mean, you know, our provider is Verizon as well. And there's parts and stuff of our county that have terrible Verizon coverage. So our devices that are out there that we're utilizing are useless in those areas of our county, which I'm sure you could say that about any county around. So they're going to have black spots anywhere. So everybody's in that same boat. So.
Now, the plan that we signed off in Iowa to opt in, the maps that the committee took a look at and what AT&T is promising, if that comes true, absolutely. It's great coverage.
And I guess if you need help working with DAS to say there's other state agencies, there's, you know, that are at whenever the time comes to use FirstNet, that, you know, I'd be willing to help to figure out how to get DAS to allow state agencies to use FirstNet instead of the contract that they have at the time, Verizon now.
Okay. Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay, we're up to the Motorola project manager Isicsb update. Melvin, there he is.
Good morning. Let me plug in real quick. All right, can everybody see the image? Okay, well, as you know, we've been working pretty hard to try to get a lot of things done before the end of the year. We've been pushing this very aggressively. Last time we used the format to give you sort of a visual illustration where things stood. I think that was very helpful. So I'm trying to keep that format. Things get kind of cluttered, so I have to walk through some of these things, but hopefully this will help. Normally we look at these numbers, and right now, if you look at each region, you know, we're anywhere from the lower to the upper 70s, or mid to upper 70%, overall 72%. So it seems like it's crawling in the overall, but that's because there's a lot of other things that have to happen after the build out itself. So even though there's a lot of activity right now out in the field, you know, this 72 will crawl until basically the last 25% of the project will be basically the first half of next year. All right. So we showed you this map last time around, and this time I actually put little squares in the counties that have the sites that I'm not necessarily tracking, but very aware of, because these are the counties that so far have chosen to have local enhancements to the overall system for their own purposes. But overall, you know, we had labeled all of these so you can see what was completed. One of the things that I changed in here is a label active to active build. That brought some confusion to some folks, so I changed that. That means that we're actively building a site. That means drilling for foundations, pouring concrete, all the stuff that goes on with building up a site. So we have change, and as we go to the next one, I'm highlighting here 7 sites that have changed status. Overall, as things move on, I wanted to show you what that status had changed from. So, for example, if we look at Region 1, which is in the middle, the first one has changed status from what would have been a lease site to a build site, which is in regulatory status. Now, this label here is sort of a hybrid of two, because this is a DNR site, but it's in regulatory. So instead of just a brown with a D, it's a brown, but with an R for regulatory. All right. The next few sites here have changed from what used to be, we ordered the towers for it, so now we're actually building foundations for the towers. So towers have been ordered, they're gonna be coming in late November. So we're in the process of building up foundations for all of these. This particular site here has changed from what was active build to a site completed for civil. Up here, we have a site that changed from, again, we had finished the regulatory, so we ordered the tower, to now we're actually drilling the foundations and getting ready to pour the concrete for the foundations. Down south, we changed from regulatory status to active build. And on the east side of the state, we changed from, again, regulatory status to ordering the tower. So in this example, we wanted to make sure that we completed the regulatory, that we got the NEPAs and the SHPOs approved before we actually go ahead and build the steel. So now that we got it approved, we immediately go ahead and put in the order for the tower so we can get it in before the end of the year. So I have this little symbol here because I wanted to explain why is it that we do that? Why is it that we wait for the regulatories to complete before we actually order steel? So here in this example, in these two sites up here, which are in Region 1, turns out that during the regulatory process, the FAA told us that this particular tower was too high. So we had to redo the design and lower the tower, but that resulted and this other tower over here having to go higher. That's the whole domino effect. When you change one tower, it has an effect on the adjacent towers. So that's one of the reasons why we don't order the steel, because if we do, then we end up with steel that we can't use. Very expensive steel. Any questions about this map before I move forward? All right, so overall activities, we continue to work with Des Moines site reconfiguration. This is for integration of a site that we have in Des Moines and some of the data applications as well. We're working with Westcom, doing a lot of that work with Westcom and Rob Dennert. We continue to push for more civil completions, so we're looking at about another 30 sites before the end of the year. Microwave dish installations continue, and that's just going to be an ongoing process between here and first quarter. And we have, of the sites that we've actually built, we have about 46% of those sites have power already. The remaining sites are just on the queue. This is the whole application for power, getting on their queue so that they can come out and do the power installs and confirmation and all that. So it's all in the queue right now, but right now we have roughly half of the sites built have powered on them. So what that means for us is as the power comes on, we have a secondary crew that goes out to all the towers and starts installing the batteries. Remember, we had ordered all this equipment, we had it in the warehouse. We didn't want to put them in the shelters if it's going to be freezing out there. So once the power is applied, we power up the shelters, the heaters kick in, and now we have a secondary crew that's driving throughout the entire state installing these batteries. And that's a particular, very specific team because, the batteries are about 120 pounds each, and it is 8 hours worth of batteries. So we're talking between 4 and 6 shelves, each shelf having 4 batteries on it. So it requires a specific physique and equipment to be able to do that. As we move forward, we had mentioned last time that there were some internal state processes that needed to be resolved before we could build on the 2 categories of sites, which were IPTV and DNR. The DNR sites have been resolved, so we're moving forward with the DNR sites. And the only ones that remain right now are the 3 IPTV tower sites. So we're working on that. We're doing some further loading analysis, working with the IPTV team, and I'm expecting that to be resolved relatively soon. All the lease sites, as I mentioned before, they are identified. We have all the drawings set up, but we don't want to hit go until we lock every single site. Because as you saw, if one of these sites drop, like an IPTV site, it can have an impact on the overall design. So we don't want to lock in the leases until everything else is locked in. Other aspects here that I don't have covered here is, in some cases, we're doing some sites. We're working with, for example, with DOT, Jeff Sunholm and his team, where we have to make sure that we don't interrupt his operations. So we're putting up some temporary sites so that they can continue to operate with their VHF channels while we're building a site where their site used to be. That's all I had. Any questions?
Yeah, Melvin, I have one. Well, it's kind of two. As far as some of the sites near cores, when do you expect those to perhaps be active and all networked together and more or less fully functional?
So we have one core that's fully active. We have the other two. We've installed some equipment at the sites, and others we've held back because in order to bring them up, we have to synchronize all the three cores together. And since the backhaul isn't up yet, we want to keep them localized over here where we can do things manually at the warehouse in a temporary setup, and then we go ahead and take them out to the field. We're expecting about 90% of the sites to be billed by the end of this year. Some of these, if you look at the map, some of these are on regulatory process. We have about 10 right now that are on the regulatory process. We're expecting about half of those to be resolved this year, and we're just waiting for that to be resolved so we can start that process. So the remaining to fall out, it'll probably be January, February by the time we get those towers done. Once we do that, in the same process, that's why I always keep on saying the microwave, because the microwave gets billed as the towers become available both ends, so we can have crews that point the dishes in both directions. So we want to start doing the coverage testing when foliage comes. So April, May timeframe is when we'd be targeting for that. So that means all the other stuff is going to be done by then.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Tim. Olmsted.
Good morning. I'll try to make this brief. Chris, you're too modest in your report about the skip feedback. Working with my team, we've done an internal hot wash on the 5 states that we did the enhanced statewide communications interoperability plans as pilots this year, and without question, Iowa's had the best outcome, largely in part due to the coordination effort of the SWIC, but more importantly for broad, robust participation from those involved. And I think the actions involved speak very favorably to the efforts that were made here. Would offer a suggestion. You mentioned that you're looking at a future date on encryption. You're not way out of line with what we see in other areas. We had a very lively, let's say, discussion in one of the larger regions here this week, talking about moving to standards-based AES 256 multi-key encryption. And it was agreed that that particular region, which involves 2 states, 9 counties, and about 36,000 subscribers already on the air, the effective date for compliance will be December 31 of 2021. That's because the system is already in place. Most of the subscribers in the network use a proprietary voice privacy scheme rather than encryption, and they do not have multi-key capability. So what you find is the weakest link in there, whatever entity that is, that holds it up. So it is a long process, but what I hear here in Iowa is very positive, and I think you're going to be in a good place when the time comes to finally put this in play. 2 other quick things that I wanted to highlight. Certainly willing to support whatever we can in terms of OEC technical assistance for the state. Chair Pavlik and the committee have done a good job of calling out some things. Interested in talking to you about the ComL Train the Trainer, if there's something we can do to support that as well. And the last thing I wanted to at least briefly mention, constantly talk about one of the tools in the toolkit that doesn't cost you a lot is the GETS and WPFs, particularly for people who do technical support for your organizations. We have some feedback from Harvey, Irma, and Maria that suggests for the GETS program, the actual landline calling card type style connectivity, connectivity was well over 98% on all calls attempted, and on wireless priority, over 94%. Now, that does not include Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands because we have some international carriers there, and we haven't summarized the feedback on what works and what doesn't. But as with any program, we now see competition in the wireless priority service arena. So as where you used to pay a monthly fee and a per minute fee for for wireless priority service, that is no longer necessarily the case. You should check with your carrier. There are a number who are waiving the fee entirely for monthly access, and some have also waived the per minute charge. So it's actually now public safety focused, and there is no cost to have the program in place. So if there's anything we can answer for you, I don't want to advertise anything here, but if there are specific questions, one-off, Chris probably will have this information if he doesn't already. I can certainly talk to you individually. Any questions for me? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Move on to old business. Standards Working Group, Terry isn't here. I can go ahead and update everybody on that. As you know, we're developing quite a few policies that we need in place by time system acceptance rolls around that come through this board for the interoperability purposes and the use and policies and protocols on how the system works and some of the rules on using it. So what we have been doing is the policies get extracted from other examples from other states as best practice. The Standards Working Group team cuts and pastes, takes out, inserts Isicsb into some words, and then that flows to the Standards Subcommittee, which is a representative from each one of our standing committees to take a look at the policy. After they look at it, it comes back through. We'd make the edits that they choose to make, and then Jason and I look at them. Eventually, we push it to governance. John Benson will then present it to the board for approval. However, but what we've been finding is that's a lot of responsibility on our part for Jason and I to look at. There's some stuff in there that we're assuming that the subcommittee has looked at and made edits to, but I've noticed on a few of them that the danger of cutting and pasting, you have to really be careful to make sure we're not cutting and pasting a policy in something that we can't even provide, okay? Some of them are pretty simple, pretty basic, but there's some of them that really get into the weeds, and we got to make sure that that policy actually applies to Isicsb system and that our committees can handle what we're adopting a policy for. So in order to do that, we're going to have another, you talk about adding layers and committees, right? But I think this one's important and necessary. So we're going to call another meeting after the next board meeting for the Standards Subcommittee, the working group, and some of the chairs and vice chairs to meet here after the next board meeting to go through what policies that have been edited, what policies that need to come through the system, and actually do a face-to-face, go through all these and make sure that it's accurate, and then that our committees can actually handle what's going on here. And I think that's the last step to vet it. Once it's vetted through there, then I think Jason and I can probably become more comfortable with handling those once it's been called extreme vetting through the policy. So we're covered there. Does that make sense? Because there's a lot of stuff that is pretty technical, and there are technical people on our committees. However, it's just one more layer to ensure that we don't look here a year from now and go, oh my gosh, operations is supposed to do all this work and they didn't even know they had to. Nor are they capable, because, right, we're all volunteers here. We have other jobs. So that's the danger, but we do need to have them in place. It's important. And I think we could do that if we have a nice streamlined process here. So that's the report on that.
Well, one thing I'll add to that and stuff is that the last thing I want to be is the bottleneck on those getting pushed to governance. So when that duty is for looking at those standards groups, those standards that are getting pushed to us and having to be signing off on them, obviously I want them to be correct, but I'm also trusting that everybody else is on the other end doing everything they can, because I'm not the most technical person in the world. I will be the first person to admit that. So I do not like to be the bottleneck on that approach, but the things that I can say, I mean, I do push off, and it doesn't happen very fast. So I know that they're getting pushed at a great rate. You guys are doing a great job, Ethan, and the rest of the standards working group are doing a great job on that. It's just sometimes it just takes me a little bit longer because I'm going to have more questions than what your group and stuff is doing. So, so sorry about that if it's taking a little bit longer than what you think or what you want. So.
Jason, I was told questions are good because
Oh,
that
yeah.
helps them figure everything out, and make sure the lowest common
I
denominator is
do,
happy.
and I am the lowest common denominator in a lot of those things. So I will be the first person to admit that. So.
And most of these policies, and I've told Deb this, it falls on operations. Everything is operations when it comes to using this stuff. So fortunately, operations is good, but unfortunately, there's going to be a tremendous amount of work, and I want to make sure that they can handle that, and their expectations are.
That being said, I know that when we had a phone call here last week, talked about that a little bit, and I think there was a little bit of with John Benson had a question about whether or not the governance committee should be seeing the comments or should it be cleaned up by the time it gets to governance. So I know that there's a question there on whether or not when the standards working group is seeing it and then doing their comments, should it be cleaned up before governance sees it? I don't know if Dave wants to speak about that or not. So
Yeah, I think that was the general impression of the governance group, was that we would be endorsing or approving something that was in final form.
Right.
Now, I'll also mention, though, as it relates to your comments about concern about delaying the process, some of these seem to need more editing than others. And so I would encourage, if there are things that, there was a edit that referred to the system in Minnesota instead of the Iowa system.
Right.
If it's something that simple, in the meantime, before next meeting, if it's something that can be forwarded to governance, I think we're eager to act quickly and to bring something to the next board meeting. So, and it also may help to have in a little more digestible or bite-sized pieces. So, 3 or 4, if they're easily edited between now and the next 2 weeks, governance can do its part. So the group next time, the full board can act on a few, and then we'll likely have a few the following and the following and the following. So we're not tasking this group with a dozen of them day one, and this logjam continues to perpetuate.
Anything else? Okay, we'll move on to new business. Isicsb approval, UGC Chair Buffington. See, we have Adair, Buena Vista, Marion County, Virginia Township Fire Rescue. Would you like to talk about each one? I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, as we consider these applications, that's really why, as I mentioned in my report, the need for the applicant review panel, people that are a little bit more techie, because there was questions on nearly each one of these, with the exception, I believe, of Marion County Sheriff's application, because some people are finding that when they're filling out the matrix, is what we use for loading analysis. What we're seeing is that they either don't understand what they're supposed to put down, because most everyone is asking for level 1 access, which is just interoperability. Some are level 2, obviously those with adding resources are 3 and beyond. So one of the things that I had to double back on is asking some questions, and it's more of a confusion matter, and that's why as we look back at these applications, everything will be fine with them. The one question that I have the committee member ask every time, will what they're going to do, break it. And that's all, we always drop that on Melvin and say, is it going to break the system? That being said, the Adair, Guthrie, Buena Vista, and Marion County Sheriffs are asking for level 1 access, and Virginia Township Fire and Rescue level 2, which almost is neither here nor there. As we as a user group committee have discussed, our answer should almost always be yes, unless they're doing something extraordinarily wrong, and that's where we're going to go back to the applicant review panel. So with that being said, I would recommend that all 4 applicants, in the form of a motion, I would move that all 4 applicants be approved for access to Isicsb.
Okay, a motion on the table for Adair, Guthrie Emergency Management, Buena Vista County, Marion County Sheriff, Virginia Township Fire Rescue be approved for access to Isicsb. Do I have a second?
Second by Casper.
Casper, any further discussion?
Where's Virginia Township Fire Rescue?
Warren County.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, we'll move on to public comment. If anybody in our audience would like to come up and join the podium here and address the board, you're welcome to do that at this time. Go ahead, Terry.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Terry Brennan with Raycom. Patrick, I appreciate some of the comments you were making about subscribers and getting radios authorized on the system, because across the country that can be a point of contention. And also, Chris, prior to you joining, there was some discussion about, on the Isicsb website, there was a list of the P25 CAP certification and what radios qualified. And then it was taken down, and I think that caused a little bit of uproar in some circles about whether or not a CAP certified radio was going to be authorized in and of its own. And I would encourage you to use that national certification as the benchmark for what radios you'll allow on the system, because P25, it doesn't necessarily cover everything, right? It doesn't dictate how manufacturers kind of internally work. It's almost like the P25 standard is going to make sure that the roads and intersections and traffic lights enable everybody to communicate together, but it's not going to tell you how to run your household behind closed doors. And so I think if you go down a path where you're creating requirements that the radios work the way just Motorola radios work, then you're going to take what is an open standard platform and turn it into something that becomes a bit more proprietary. So if you look, like over in Johnson County, they've had a P25 system for, I think, since 2010. But over there, they have, Harris is the manufacturer there, but they have Harris radios, they have Motorola radios, Kenwood, E.F. Johnson, Tate. All of those radios, by complying with the P25 certification, they all work and interoperate and meet that need. But you can go to some states where if they don't do certain features certain ways, even though they comply and they work on the system, they create requirements that prevent user agencies from actually getting and using the radio they want to use. And so I think that, especially, Harris and Motorola are kind of the 2 biggest players in this space. And there are already like 7,000 Harris P25 radios in the state. And I think we want them to be authorized on your system for interoperability, right? That's what's going to be best for everybody. So I would just encourage you to try, if you can, to use that national certification as the benchmark. And I think it will really help with your adoption and prevent a lot of the problems and negative emotions and everything else that can occur if people think that you're trying to dictate, which radio or manufacturer they ought to buy or who they ought to buy it from. So that's all.
I'm going to speak up here because I don't, sorry. I can tell you in the technology committee, I mean, we've been cognizant of a lot of that. And I know that just as well as you do because we've got Harris equipment sitting on 9 facilities that we hope to use within that system. And so I just know that from the technology committee standpoint, we're trying to be as open-minded as we possibly can. And there's never been any discussion that, hey, let's try to shut one person out over it. We've been very open-minded about what we're dealing with. Now, have we gotten that far? Maybe not.
Right.
But I just want you to know, we've been very open-minded about a lot of these things.
And that is what I've seen, and Chris, you've made that comment on several occasions. I think you made a recent Facebook post to that extent. But I wanted to make everybody aware of it because it could turn into a real problem because most people don't know what P25 standards are and are not, and what capabilities and specifications go beyond that. And so I just, I wanted to just make sure that there was visibility to that because I think it'll help everything if you do.
Let me ask you a question. What kind of limitations are you referring to? I mean, what limitations are you referring to that would exclude one vendor or brand from another?
Boy, I'm not the technical with the detail, but I mean, it could be certain things about like how they roam. I don't even know if Dwayne, if you know any. I apologize. I kind of fly at 30,000 feet, but Chris, you'll be in our office next week, right? We could talk to our technical people about that. But it was well over a dozen years before Harris radios were ever authorized to work on Minnesota's armor system. That's an example where they kept saying, nope, it doesn't do it the way we're going to do it. But it met the P25 certification. And so you go state after state after state and see examples of where they instituted requirements that were above and beyond the P25 standard. And let's talk about it next week, Chris, while you're in Marshalltown.
But Terry, can you just repeat what the standard beyond P25 was that you're suggesting this national cap?
Oh, well, it's called it's a P25 cap certification. I can't remember what the CAP even stands for. But it is the national benchmark where there are independent parties that certify the manufacturer and model numbers to say, yes, we've tested that to the P25 standard, and therefore it's approved. And at one time, that approved list was basically reproduced on the Isicsb website. And I think several months ago it was taken down, and just not sure why.
If I may add, with permission of the board, it's compliance assessment program, if I remember correctly. It does attempt to mitigate different interpretations of the standards. For example, if you start getting down into the nitty-gritty, if you put a radio in emergency mode, the emergency mode does different things for different manufacturers. The end result is still the same for the end users and those in dispatch, but some of the processes differ significantly. That CAP program is designed to make sure that at a bare minimum, things will work with each other. Now, that being said, that list, I believe, was out of date when it came off the website. If I'm out of turn in saying that, someone please correct me. But
That's not what you told me. You didn't tell, when I discussed, well, it wasn't you. I too questioned why that was removed, and it was with Swick Allen at the time, and it wasn't an out-of-date thing. He just, I can't recall exactly what he said. Some of the funds that IDPH uses is grant funds, and if there's no list out there for somebody to be able to purchase radios, then we can't purchase them. So we don't know what will be allowed on the system. And that list, I think, is valuable. And if it was out of date, that wasn't the reason that Swick Allen gave me. I think we need to be able to tell users these are the radios that'll work on our system. And if you're coming onto our system, if it's a P25 compliant radio, then Melvin should make sure that it works on his system. I mean, not him personally, but, or Motorola, if it's P25, they should be, if it's compliant, then it should be on there. And I'm concerned about the list missing too.
I certainly can't, I don't know why I was taking.
The idea of a list came out of the user group committee, and for those for everything that everybody's talking about here is specifically for that, so that a user can go and find these are the different radios that I can purchase, and they're going to work on the system. And that's why what we did at the user group committee is we said, hey, look, what's the minimum standards? And we're not technical, so we dumped it on technology, and that's why whatever they come back with is exactly what we're talking about. Vendor agnostic, number one. After that, then we want, what we had talked about at the user group committee is that bring in those radios, whether make, model number, doesn't really matter. And so those vendors would come in, those manufacturers, and say, this radio will work on your system. Great. Try it. If it doesn't break it, it's good. I mean, it's really that simple. I mean, I think that's, you know, based on those national standards as well.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, by no means am I complaining about what you guys have done. I was just kind of, you know, moving forward, I want you to be aware that that kind of thing can turn into a point of contention and has in other places. So that's all. Wasn't complaining about it.
No problem.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Got two, whatever one you can agree on.
Mine's a pretty simple question. I'm kind of coming in new to the whole idea of the Isicsb system, but I'm a county engineer in Mahaska County. Our need in secondary roads for P25 is really not there. Do they be able to be involved with this system? Do we have to look at having P25 compatible radios? Or can something else work? Because at 70 vehicles, that's a tremendous amount of money when you're looking at a department budget and what have you. And that was, you know, we've been discussing back and forth the different systems, but for my folks, I don't need a P25. I don't think we ever have anything that's that data sensitive that would require something to that. So how, is it something that I should look at just doing our own system? Most counties do it that way, even the DOT. Are there, I mean, is it all going to be based on a P25 type radio? Maybe it's a silly question, but like I said, we're trying to save money and still get a communication system that works.
That depends on what you want to do with the county roads. I mean, I'll just use Department of Corrections as an example. We bought a digital system for all 9 facilities. It's not P25, but we bought a digital system because that's what they wanted to do. But on top of that, we incorporated P25 control stations for each location because we didn't have the funds to pay for all that P25 equipment. So our answer to that was to put P25 control stations at each location and give it the capability to patch into our operational systems should the need arise. And that's what we've done.
And we've tried to look at different things to that too, but the radios we have, we've gone to digital.
Yeah,
And so will a regular, I'm not sure, 1250, even, you know, different type radios that we have now are not P25.
Right.
Will they work in this system? Or do I have to reinvent the whole system?
Is it a VHF radio?
I believe they probably all are, aren't they? Because we have, most of those are VHF.
I think you have a VHF digital system.
So it won't work on this. We'd have to scrap all those radios in order.
You'd have to get at least a 700 megahertz radio.
Yes.
Unless you can do some patching like Patrick said.
So that's the thing, is because when we discussed it at our committee meetings and stuff back there, a lot of the, you know, you start looking at a lot of the costs and you start, okay, with where we're at, we don't have the need for the just, you know, the encryption and all that other stuff unless we're really in trouble, which I hope we don't. But it's, you know, I have to look at, is it something that we just need to go for the use we have for intercommunication between vehicles and whatever, and also on handhelds when we're out flagging and stuff on the roads, do we need to have that level of a radio? Or can we do with the 700 or the radios that we have now if they're digital?
Well, it's an operational question, right? So it's all about operability versus interoperability. So there's two ways to do it. You can strictly go with interoperability, then in an emergency, you want to access one of the regional talk groups on for interop piece to talk to the sheriff's department or talk to the state or an ambulance or whatever, or to the PSAP on a regional talk group. That's interop, right? So that's just, but it still takes a radio in that frequency to access that talk group, right?
That talk group. So
Or
we would,
operationally, you can do whatever you want. You're just gonna have to decide at some point, do I want to stay on VHF? Or do I want to switch to 700 when it comes time to replace my radios? So you certainly can stay where you're at on VHF and maybe have a few radios that access the interoperability system, just a cache, so to speak, at your shop. In case there is an emergency, you can grab one.
okay.
Because we may use roads during a flood, for instance, blocking intersections, and you could become a first responder at that point. And if you have a cache sitting there in your shop that you can grab, then you can access those regional talk groups that the responders will be talking on during that event.
And there are a lot of times when we have to close roads off. It's nice to be able to get that information back to the center.
Yeah, so that in that case, just buy a small cache. And you get the whatever vendor you want, the basic radio in 700 P25, and be surprised that they're not that expensive. I mean, I'm not going to say they're not that expensive, but certainly you don't have to replace your whole complete cache unless you choose to 5, 6, 7 end of life.
Okay. Thank you very much for your help.
Anybody else?
I just want to follow up real quick on the concern about the standards. The P25 cap standard was designed by Homeland Security just to make sure that the radios meet the minimum required standards, that they are actually P25 compliant. I've exchanged a lot of information with the user group, technical committee group. As we're building out the system, we talk with just about everybody. And I think what really drives the concern is really expectations. What it boils down to, what I've always recommended is keep it simple, right? All you really need is that the radio can push a talk and you can get on the system and you can talk to everybody else that's on the system. What it really boils down to is starting to build sort of a database that's either maintained by the user group committee or the technical committee, but the whole idea is features are wide and vast, radios are different, and if folks want to do certain things that the system can't do, they need to understand that it won't work, right? And that's really is what it boils down to. If you expecting geolocation services and your radio doesn't have the firmware or the hardware to do it, then whoever is purchasing the radios need to know that feature, that capability is just not going to be there for them. But overall, it does make sense. It's not uncommon for statewide systems, those who administer the systems, that as radios come on, you know, they just get added. You get the basic testing, make sure that it works as the particular user wants to use it. And if it works, you add that to the list so that next time somebody else goes, they don't even have to go through the process. They can just look up the list and see that that was already tested. Eventually, as time goes on, there will be less and less testing because that database keeps on growing until newer features and capabilities come out. So my recommendation has always been keep it simple, but just make sure, since this is for public safety use, that folks understand that if there's a particular capability that they're looking for, that the radio does support it and that it matches with what the system can provide. Okay? If you have any questions about this, feel free to contact me. You know, we have vast engineering services. We can look into this and even provide more assistance if necessary.
Anybody else? Okay. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Jeff Sunholm, second. For adjourn, thank you.